Hey there. Last time I talked about the humanitarian disaster going on in Yemen and how shameful it is that the United States is supporting Saudi Arabia's efforts there. I also talked about how, in a lot of ways, what's going on in Yemen is even worse than what has been happening in Syria for the past 6 years. But in one sense, it's better, at least from the U.S. perspective. I've become convinced that the United States bears the primary responsibility for what happened in Syria. Yemen is not entirely our fault. Yemen was screwed long before the United States got to the region. Afghanistan has a reputation as the graveyard of empires, but I think Yemen has just as good a claim to the title. Yemen's super-strategic location at the center of world trade routes has sucked in empire after empire, from the Ottomans to the British to about 1,000 years' worth of Egyptians. Yemen managed to give the Ottoman Empire some of its worst defeats in two very different historical eras. From 1538 to 1634, Yemen ate up tens of thousands of Ottoman soldiers. I've heard Yemen characterized as the Ottoman Vietnam. The Ottomans were kicked out the first time by Zaydi Shias that ended up ruling parts of Yemen from the late 1500s up until 1962. Sometimes the Zaydi Shia ruling class was up. Hey, look at that. We're selling a ton of coffee. Should we invade Mecca again? Sometimes they were down. Ah, damn it, the Ottomans are back. But they remain a dominant factor in Yemen today. It was British adventuring in Yemen in the 19th century that convinced the Ottomans they had to come back. And that's where we can find the root of most of Yemen's problems. All right, that doesn't sound right. A quarter of Yemen's problems. That doesn't sound right either. Yemen has a lot of problems. Anyway, in 1839, the British took the southern port of Aden. This convinced the Ottomans that they had to come back in the north, which they did in 1849 to block the British. Over the next 150 years, until the 1990s, northern and southern Yemen developed along very different paths. The Ottomans spent another 70 years fighting to hold the north, allying with and battling against different tribes along the way. They finally gave up entirely in 1918 after losing World War I. The Zaydi Shia imams were there to pick up the pieces, setting up a kingdom. They fought a good Game of Thrones against the Hashemites and the Sauds in those amorphous years between the world wars, but they ended up losing pretty badly. And that may be Yemen's principal misfortune. Since World War II and the launch of the Saudi oil industry, the forces playing with Yemen have no longer been a sea or a continent away. They've been right next door. Having transcontinental empires fight over your country sucks, but having more local powers fight over that country can be even worse. Southern Yemen was a British colony for over a century. In 1967, when the British finally gave up, the folks who kicked them out set up South Yemen, a communist country that lasted for almost a quarter century. North Yemen functioned as an independent kingdom from 1918 to 1962, when it fell victim to the clash of two of those local powers, Egypt and Saudi Arabia. The last Zaydi Shia king was kicked out in a coup, starting an 8-year civil war in North Yemen that killed somewhere between 100 and 200,000 people. In the 1950s and 1960s, the main clash in the Middle East was between Arab nationalists backed by the Soviet Union and more traditional powers backed by the United States. The face of Arab nationalism was Egypt's charismatic ruler, Gamal Abdel Nasser. Yemen was where the dream of Arab nationalism died. Nasser's Egypt sent 70,000 soldiers to support Yemen's military coup. Saudi Arabia, ironically, armed and supported the forces loyal to the last Zaydi Shia imam. This conflict has eerie parallels to today. Egypt exerted itself to an extraordinary extent, spending money and soldiers that it really couldn't spare. Saudi Arabia mostly just sent money and arms to support the Zaydi Shias and other tribes who were much stronger on the ground. Today, Saudi Arabia is spending an extraordinary amount of money and diminishing political capital fighting Zaydi Shias rather than supporting them. It's very controversial, the extent to which Iran is supporting those Zaidi Shias, but most agree that they're spending a tiny fraction of the amount of money that Saudi Arabia is spending on this war. To take it back to the 1960s, in the end, the Egyptian side kind of won, but it killed Egypt as a regional player. The distraction of the war in Yemen guaranteed that Nasser lost the Six-Day War with Israel in 1967, destroying Egypt's credibility. The last Yemeni king did leave the country, but the new Yemen Arab Republic in the north quickly became a Saudi client. This competition between empires and more local powers has been terrible for Yemen. It has led to a lot of devastating war, but it's also made the country ungovernable in times of peace. Different tribes and factions are supported by outside powers. No Yemeni government has been able to set up anything like a truly functioning state. The country has always been more of a negotiation between armed power blocs than a nation. For the past half-century, Saudi Arabia has made sure that no government emerges that can truly challenge it. Yemen's disaster is not entirely the fault of the United States. But we're not blameless either. Saudi Arabia is a U.S. colony, after all. Next time, we'll tell the sad story of North and South Yemen and the one supremely Machiavellian guy who made it look like a united Yemen was possible, if only for a little while. Today's disaster makes it clear that Ali Abdullah Saleh's Yemen was always an illusion. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe. And if you'd like a free essay, please sign up for my email newsletter. Thanks.